Making Action Happen is produced in partnership with Action Colorado, featuring members and community members with a nonpartisan lens. We discuss the unique public policy needs and issues outside the Denver metro area. Here's your host, Sarah Blackhurst.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I am here with my very good friend, Simon Tafoya. Now, Simon is one of those quietly impressive people. He worked in the Hickenlooper administration. He's a consultant. He's done amazing work. He's one of Pueblo's favorite sons. He lives in Denver, but he's become like a best friend cousin to me over the last couple of years. We've been working on this whole discussion about energy. You are currently the executive director for
Cleaner Coal Communities Coalition.
Cleaner Coal Communities Coalition. The reason I wanted him to say it instead of me, even though I'm on his board, is I'm going to mess it up because I'm also, as you know, Action Colorado, and I'm the vice chair for the Coloradans for Energy Access. So there's a lot of C's there. So I'm going to mess it up if I don't. Okay. So Simon, you've done all of these things. You've worked in DC, you've worked in the former governor's administration, and now you're really involved in this energy piece. How did you get to the place where energy has become sort of a passion for you?
Sure. Having grown up in Pueblo, and my dad was a steelworker, and of course the link between Comanche and the steel mill, they're so intrinsically linked that you can't really separate them. When you think about how Pueblo has been powered for that many years, for the last more than 100 years, I've stayed connected, of course, to the community and being able to see how I can support the community through a transition as it moves away from coal facilities, and being able to look at what is possible and what can be a net positive to Pueblo as it seeks to find a new energy future.
So this is one of the things I love the most about you. You go back several generations like I do, and so your passion really is. And we both laugh together about people who were like, well, I moved here in the 70s. And so then they're an authority on Pueblo. How many generations in Pueblo County?
I will say in Pueblo County, a couple generations. In, further back, looking as my family came from the San Luis Valley, at least through my mom's side, well into
15 generations.
Yeah, well into when it was Spanish territory.
Yeah,
right?
So the border, just like me, the border crossed us twice.
Exactly.
2 times. So, and maybe that's why I give a lot more respect to your opinion on this than I would a lot of other people, because you are like me, where it's ingrained. Your blood runs red because of the iron in the soil of Southern Colorado. So a lot of interesting things have happened over the last couple of years. I've talked a lot about the PISAC report. Can we talk a little bit about that and then go into this whole idea of just transition?
Absolutely.
So PISAC, you weren't actually on the committee. You came in as some help and support. So give us an outside view of the PISAC report from somebody who's really intimately involved in it, but not actually on the committee.
Sure. Just in terms of process, number one, it was a requirement of the settlement agreement that was made between the state and Xcel Energy. So I was largely funded as a result of that settlement agreement. And of course, being able to bring to bear all of the resources that Xcel Energy has in terms of experts, independent third-party experts, independent experts in polling, independent experts in outreach, and ensuring that we did 2 different town hall events in Pueblo, one in near Salt Creek at St. Joseph's Church, and the other at the university at Colorado State University of Pueblo, and also did a series of specific outreach to do just smaller, more organic sort of meetings that allowed for people to give their impression of what should replace the facility, and what really were the goals around ensuring that Pueblo stayed whole after the closure of Comanche 3, and of course 1 and 2 will be closing this year and the following year.
So remind us when they started talking about, when they sort of made the announcement that they were going to close Comanche. What year was that? Do you remember?
Wow, you're testing my memory. Yeah, I don't want to give you the date exactly because I have to.
But it was, it's been about 10 years, hasn't it? Has been quite that long?
I wouldn't say it's been less than 10 years. I mean, there's always been sort of a conversation around how do we approach, decarbonization or reducing carbon emissions in the state of Colorado. And I think that's something that largely is popular in the state. I personally, have seen why it is important for us to reduce carbon emissions as a result of just the health in the community, quality of air, et cetera, albeit, in Pueblo, it was, maybe in some ways affectionately known as Pewtown for many years because of, the amount of emissions that were of varying different things that were going into the air. But of course, as the industries have changed and you have more sort of controls on what can be put in the air, then that's sort of the air in Pueblo has definitely improved, and the general environment has definitely improved. And I think this is a good step in that direction. I think the question though is how do we make sure that Pueblo does not lose as a result of the closure of another facility that, as I said earlier, is intrinsically linked to the community because of why it's there, and that is the steel mill. I mean, and sort of it's the identity of the community. It very much runs deep for, of course, families who have worked there for generations.
Right. So we have generations that are working there. They came in because they closed, there's 3 towers, of course, and they had closed 1, and then they closed Tower 2 is already closed, right?
Oh, which, Comanche?
Comanche.
So 1 is closed this year, 2 will be shuttered in the coming year. And then, of course, by 2031, Comanche 3 will be shuttered. And then they'll, I guess, the idea is that they would all be kind of torn down together, depending on what could be reutilized in a reuse of that facility, if that's the decision.
So tell me a little bit about the economic impact, if you will, that closure has in the dollars sense.
I mean, I'm not sure if you've mentioned it before, but you're looking at $200 million in economic impact of what that facility then provides in terms of primary jobs, and that's a very in this case, Comanche, the power plant is that allows Pueblo to export energy.
Yes.
In the same way that the steel mill provides steel and rail to export outside of the community.
Right.
And that brings wealth into the community.
Yes.
That people earn as employees, of course, in this case, union employees for the most part, and then family supporting wages. They go out and spend that into the community at secondary and tertiary jobs like a dentist, at a grocery store, at your local shoe store. And that's the money that churns through the economy that we're talking about here. And when you're seeing annually $200 million of economic activity go away, that then also impacts not just the property tax, but the sales tax that goes into the city and county or coffers. And it just has a ripple effect. And of course has a sucking effect on what is possible, and wealth will leave the community. So when we look at Comanche, we have to look at it as if Pueblo is exporting that energy and that wealth is coming into the community. And I understand that we want to control for the externalities as that a plant like Comanche creates, but we have to sort of take that and balance it with the ability for our community to have good jobs.
Yeah. I think that's a thing that's one of the more frustrating things for me in all of this, is that not only did we consider every possible scenario or every possible resource that could be put at Comanche. But in addition to that, that wasn't our main concern. Our main concern was for jobs, for, you know, beyond that. It was, we wanted to save firm energy, but those jobs in that tax base.
Well, I think of it as a kind of like a two-pronged way, which is you have to look at it, what is feasible in replacing that specific energy, because the energy that's created there is different than the energy that is created in Black Hills territory, in San Isabel's territory. And of course, you know, we, after, through years of state history, we've created this balkanized system that, you know, has created the environment, the regulatory environment in which the Comanche operates. So replacing Comanche isn't just getting to pick whatever you want. You have to first analyze and what is feasible
right
at that site, and then take into consideration what can bring, you know, what can make sure that what can keep the coffers of the county whole in terms of property taxes, because of course at the state level there's different policy that affects how those things are taxed, and then the jobs that are created,
right,
and then the economic impact that we talked about, you know, just now, which is that these primary jobs create a churning effect of money that continues to build wealth in the community.
I've talked about before with you about my grandfather who worked at the steel mill, who came from the San Luis Valley, and who was able to bring his family out of poverty so that they all went to college, which was tremendous. You hear about Hispanic families who are now first generation in higher ed, and now, so for my family, he's third and into fourth generation higher ed, but also was able, because he worked at the steel mill, was able to buy every one of his 6 children their first home, their starter home. So we hear a lot about environmental justice, but we're not talking about the bringing out of poverty that has those kind of jobs attached to them. You had some really great comments on that to me the other day. You explained it to me in a way that I honestly hadn't thought about before, and that's why I shared that story with you.
Well, we can't look at these things myopically, right? So just take one thing and only look at, you know, that in a silo, because we live in a society that interacts with different people, different environments, etc. So does everybody want to have a better environment in which to live? Absolutely. There's no denying that. Are we trying to do that with the closure of Comanche? Yes. Do the unions understand that? Does generally the community understand that there's a benefit to closing Comanche as a coal-fired plant? Yes. But that doesn't mean that the community has to suffer, that these things, that the community has to suffer from an economic standpoint. And so there is an element of economic justice that could go along with environmental justice. And yes, did, you know, in the past, did my family similar? They moved from the San Luis Valley or moved from New Mexico, all sort of former families that lived under land grants that were given under Spanish and Mexican governments. Of course, after the U.S.-Mexican War, you know, the U.S.-Mexico War, you know, the U.S. sort of entered and sort of created new laws that created an effect where sometimes land was no longer theirs.
Yeah.
Different story, which I won't get into, but that forced a little bit of a movement of people from New Mexico and southern Colorado to Pueblo in this industrial period.
Right.
And so it was those union jobs that, you know, in the industrial world that supported upward mobility for families to move up the socioeconomic ladder. And what does that mean? That means they have better education outcomes, as you just discussed. They have better health outcomes generally that are aligned with that.
Because they have better access to healthcare.
They have better access to healthcare, especially when they're a union job, because generally that comes with it.
Yes.
They have retirement, they have a pension system, so you don't have elderly who are suffering. So it helps bring that elderly out of poverty in many ways. And, so there are all of these social ailments that we talk about when we look at injustice. It has been the industrial, that industrial period where these, where people could access union jobs, and in one generation totally move out of poverty.
In one generation.
Move out
and
of
that's
poverty.
unprecedented. That had never happened in the history of the world before.
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find as an example that happened that quickly.
Yeah.
And it is an American story, right? The industrial period, but were there bad things that happened during that time?
Absolutely.
Of course, the Ludlow massacre,
right?
The contamination of the communities in which around those smelters,
yes,
around the mill, which are still being remediated today. But again, that past does not have to dictate a missed opportunity from replacing this facility that could bring both environmental benefits and economic benefits. These are not mutually exclusive. And there are factions of people who believe that you can only have one, and it's absolutely false.
I appreciate that. That's the other big frustration in what we're doing. I can't understand why they think that those things are mutually exclusive. I can't wrap my brain around that, even though that we hear that all the time. So you've done a lot of work with that, and sort of the Cleaner Coal Communities Coalition came from what we decided as a group that the work needed to continue. So what's the primary focus for you right now? What is the thing that you are working on the most with the Cleaner Coal Communities Coalition?
Well, number one, it's, which is the primary mission, which is to keep Pueblo whole. And what does that mean? It means in terms of job, number one, we know that by the virtue of closing the facility that we will see environmental benefits, period. Mm-hmm. We know that. So once that facility closes, we want to make sure that the jobs remain intact and that they're good jobs and union jobs, which mm-hmm. Of course are very important to the workers who are already there. And we want to make sure that the county and the community, the city of Pueblo, all have the benefit of the tax dollars that come from a facility like Comanche. That means $31 million a year in taxes, which means almost $1 billion in potentially foregone tax revenues that would have come from Comanche 3 if it had stayed open until 2070. And of course that $200 million of economic wealth that cycles through the community that supports other jobs in the community.
Right.
So that is what the focus of the organization has been, to ensure that the community, again, can bring these two things together, which is environmental, taking advantage of the environmental benefit and the closure, and looking at the closure as an opportunity to bring more jobs and more wealth into the community that they haven't seen for years.
So what's the answer?
I mean, I'll say this: that 2031 is a deadline that was set by the state through policy and through a regulatory framework that they had settled with, in a settlement agreement with Xcel Energy. So by 2031, they have to build something that will provide, that is feasible at that site, will provide the energy that is needed, and we're looking at about 750 megawatts of power with just Comanche 3.
I want to make sure everybody hears that. We're replacing 750 megawatts there. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there that they want to put, Xcel wants to put 14,000 megawatts out there. That's just misinformation. We're talking about 750, very minimal to replace it, to a direct replacement.
This is where it gets complex, right? I mean,
okay.
So there are different proceedings before the Public Utilities Commission.
Mm-hmm.
So, and all of this stuff is really easy to confuse and conflate.
Right.
And again, we're only talking about Xcel Energy through the Just Transition solicitation that's specific to Comanche.
Okay,
3.
Thank you.
So, I mean, it's easy to cross the wires here.
Yeah.
But again, just for simplicity's sake, looking at just that facility alone is 750 megawatts. So of course in the PISAC study we looked at what would, in order to compare apples to apples, what would a 500 megawatt facility using different sources of generation bring to the community in terms of jobs, in terms of tax dollars, in particular, and then of course that then triggers what economic activity would occur in those secondary and tertiary jobs. And what came up on top were two primary, in terms of what was feasible, again, two primary sources of energy: natural gas, which of course is still a carbon source of energy, and advanced nuclear. And so those two items would either get the closest or surpass the economic or the job creation that's needed to fill the gap, and the tax dollars that would fill the gap for the county. So that's what came on top, and that's just by virtue of comparing what potential opportunities there are.
Right.
And of course, again, for simplicity's sake, there was and like I said, to compare apples to apples, you wanted to make sure that you were looking at the generation, same amount of generation across these different sources of energy. Does that mean that they won't build a battery facility there? Not necessarily. Does that mean that they won't continue to utilize their solar assets that are there? They'll continue to use their solar assets that are there.
Yeah.
Those are not necessarily going to go away, without,
right.
For the useful time of their useful lifetime. But, and so you need something that is going to be able to ensure that the users, including the steel mill, can have ready access to that energy when it's needed. So firm and dispatchable energy when it's needed, and other sources don't necessarily provide that.
Right.
So when you're looking for, again, I don't have any charts with me to show, but you're looking at what is firm, what in terms of energy, when you could turn on it, within seconds or within a very quick or short amount of time, what can provide those jobs, what can provide the economic base, including the tax dollars, and then ultimately what is feasible by 2031.
Yeah. And
quite frankly, like as a matter of policy, they set that deadline, and that has, if you just do the math backwards, it's 2025. We're in the middle of 2025.
Yeah.
The just transition solicitation probably won't be finalized until late summer at best.
Yes. Because it's happening right now.
It's happening right now. So, maybe August there to September, there might be a final ruling. I mean, these things also, there's a little bit of, there's delays that could happen in the regulatory process. So let's just assume they get done by September, and Xcel Energy has its parameters from which it can choose to be able to solicit a new bid to build what can replace, right, Comanche Unit 3. And so that means we're at the beginning of 2026, and they're barely starting the bid process. Which is not an easy task.
No.
So how quickly they could do it, I don't know. But, if they're pushing the envelope, let's just assume in a fairy tale world that we get 6 months of a process,
a solicitation process, which it's never been 6 months, and it's never happened in 6 months, right?
Again, I mean, I'd be hard pressed. It's kind of like meteorology,
right?
Is it gonna rain here at this spot?
Meteorology in Colorado, it's about the same. Yeah. It's predicting what the legislature will do, and the regulatory world, and
exactly.
the weather. And just wait 5 minutes because it's going to change. Wait 30 minutes, it's going to change.
And policy does change, but
yes.
So again, the reality I think we're facing is what is feasible, what is going to happen, what is feasible, and we're looking at natural gas with maybe some combination of a few other sources that are existing or could be supported by newer sources of energy. But again, that technology still advancing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're just assuming that's going to be a gas plant and that they can build a gas plant in a matter of 2 years, I mean, that's really what we're looking at. It's building something within 2 years, and the only option there is gas.
It's gas. It's the only option.
I mean, and that's not me saying
that
I'm picking, because I obviously don't get to pick, but just reading the tea leaves here.
It's natural gas plant. That's the only option right now.
And, again, like in Pueblo is blessed with a lot of good things, but one in particular is a lot of sun.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, we have too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
Because Xcel Energy today has 92% or so of its solar assets, solar generation in Pueblo. And so it cannot...
92% of their assets,
solar
assets, are in Pueblo. So they've done the job.
So they've
Pueblo.
done so for Xcel Energy,
done.
for the purposes of Xcel Energy, which is not Black Hills, of course, which serves the city of Pueblo,
right?
And of course the other parts of the county that are served by San Isabel. That doesn't. We're not talking about those folks, but just for Xcel Energy, they are going to be very hard pressed, and in fact may be at a disadvantage of putting any more solar assets in Pueblo again.
And we've heard that's
just because
it's 92%, and because they have the largest solar field in the country for Evraz,
which is
services
again,
that's
which
great.
is great.
They've done the job.
So again, is it unfortunate that they can't put more solar assets down there? Yes, or that they're very limited because they've done such a good job thus far. And Pueblo has, again, too much of a good thing, sun. And for the purposes of replacing Comanche 3, it is going to be very difficult in the time frame in which it has, and within the parameters that the PUC has set and that the state has set, that we will see something different.
Other than that,
I mean, that is feasible.
So why not batteries?
Well, much like advanced nuclear, microreactors, small modular reactors, the technology is still continuing, right? We also have critical minerals that go into these batteries that are necessary.
And that's a big issue under the current administration.
Well, I mean, it's always been a big issue, but it's even more as we look at additional tariffs, what sort of reactionary policies in the trade environment and the global environment that others are going to restrict.
And really feeling okay with the humanitarian impact of how we get those minerals.
Well, listen, I mean, there are trade-offs to everything, right? There are trade-offs to no matter what energy source you have, you don't have solutions, you just have trade-offs. So like when we moved away from fossil fuels, and again in generation for utility scale, and also for vehicular, as vehicles became more electrified, those all have come from somewhere, right, with arguably cheap labor in usually the developing world, and it comes with environmental impacts. And that's just at the beginning of it, right? In the mining and the manufacturing of these facilities, because many of them are not being built here. In fact, solar panels, they're very limited local production or domestic production of solar panels. And so when you're looking at this, everybody sort of ignores those impacts as if they didn't happen because we just got the solar panel and everything is rosy.
Right.
Well, there was an impact, and then there's also the impact when the life of that solar array, those solar fields, end within 20 to 30 years, and then what do you do with them? So again, there's a trade-off there. Have we made a policy decision that is a good trade-off to make? Yes, we have. But in the instance where we need to find firm and dispatchable energy that also does the same thing, we have to be looking outside the box in terms of what is possible. And yes, everything is going to create some sort of trade-off. The issue is, how do we manage it, and how do we create a plan to do just that, right?
Yeah. So it's not all doom and gloom.
No.
There's some really great options out there. There's some really great work that's already been done. Although we're faced with this whole, and I tend to get a little doom and gloom, and you help me with that a lot, where you're like, it's not mutually exclusive. We can have both. We can do both. How do we share that? And how do we help other people see that we can do both and we deserve both? That's one of the things that's really hard.
I think the perfect example, I mean, in our political environment right now, there's not much that the two parties that are dominant parties can agree on. The one thing that they have been able to agree on is, and for maybe different reasons, right?
Right.
In the Biden administration, and I don't think it's a big secret that I'm a Democrat, but in the Biden administration, you had the his signature bills, Biden's signature bills that got passed through in a bipartisan fashion, the Congress, the U.S. Congress, that included, significant investments in advanced nuclear.
Yeah, it's called the Advanced Act.
That was another bill that specifically looked at the regulatory framework and how to expedite it, because we know the Democrats and the Republicans knew that, or at least on the Democratic side, if our goal is to reduce carbon emissions, within the United States, where we have control, and influence abroad,
yes,
the reductions in carbon emissions, there's really one answer,
right?
And it's advanced nuclear. And are there trade-offs to that? Absolutely, there are trade-offs to that. And do we need to figure out how to manage it? Absolutely. But at this time, the only form of energy generation that is regulated from cradle to crib is nuclear. And that tells you something, because we got to know where the fuel is coming from
and how it's created,
how the facility is run to the the safest standards that we have
in
today
the world,
and to operate the facility for decades. And of course, there is a waste product that comes from it, and being able to mitigate that. And that's where the policy kind of has been challenged over the years, over several decades, about how to manage the waste, and where to sort of create a repository for it. So that's just a public policy question that needs to be dealt with. And that's, again, going to happen at the federal level, I think. Well,
it has to happen.
It has to happen at the federal level.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all that to say, there is, I think that from the Democratic perspective, you've seen administrations and energy secretaries under a Democratic president, Joe Biden, who wholeheartedly believe that if we were serious about moving away from carbon as a fuel source, that advanced nuclear was going to be our option to move away from that, of course, in combination and coordination with other renewable and intermittent assets that are available as the technology improves. And so it's everybody operates as if it's a zero-sum game here, and it's not. I mean, these things can operate in concert, because the sun doesn't always shine. I know I sound like a broken record. The sun doesn't always shine, and the wind doesn't always blow. And in the cases like Xcel Energy, where they have their assets and they've invested as much as they possibly can in one area, for the benefit of generator production at that site, they have to look at other options.
Well, and it was not their decision to shut that down. It was, this is what you're going to do. And so now Xcel is doing everything they can to figure it out. So
yeah, and they're, of course, we have a regulatory environment that governs what those options will be, and so that's what we're kind of faced with right now. And 2031, I mean, it's just around the corner.
It's a blink. It's going to be here it's going to be here so fast. So just to wrap up, if there's, I'm going to ask you two things. One, if there's one message that, if you were the king of all communications for the day and you could put out everything that you could, what would the message be to everybody?
Everybody writ large, or?
Yeah, just everybody.
I think
at
it's
large.
Number one, don't foreclose opportunities that exist today that will help the community and communities like Pueblo move forward, and don't foreclose the opportunities that may come as technology advances. Because once you do that, you've then again written off an opportunity for an entire generation.
I love that. So my second question is, what can we do to help Cleaner Coal Communities Coalition, and really the message that you guys are trying to get out?
I mean, I think it's encouraging folks to be open-minded. I know, just by virtue of everything we've seen in popular culture over the last several decades since the Cold War and World War II, that we think of nuclear as a scary thing. There, of course, are different technologies that you can use within the nuclear environment, for lack of a better word. Different fuel sources. It's not just uranium that you're looking at. Uranium was the element of choice because before World War II, the United States was interested in creating weapons.
Right.
Right. And that's not necessarily the case anymore.
Yeah, uranium produces, the byproduct of that is plutonium, and that's weapons grade.
So thorium, for example, which still is radioactive and can be used in the production, which again this technology has been around for a long time, it just hasn't been invested in. And it is the waste is less radioactive and will decay much more quickly than uranium waste, or waste that comes from when uranium is used as a primary fuel source. So again, like, these technologies are moving very quickly. They're advancing very quickly. And again, if we foreclose the opportunity of even looking at it as an option, then it's done a disservice, I think, to everybody. Yeah. And not to mention what will go into creating an entire supply chain for the industry. The United States has not invested.
Thank you.
The United States has not invested in the nuclear supply chain. And we're not talking about fuel alone. I'm talking about all the widgets that go into
creating the plant.
To create the plant, right? Some are being created because it's, you have cooling towers and cooling mechanisms that you use in other applications that could perhaps be used, but there are very specific things that have to be used that are more robust. I mean, there's a whole PNNL lab in Washington, in Oak Ridge. In fact, somebody I know whose son is from Pueblo is actually working kind of in the materials science space, who is helping develop these new materials that can withstand sort of the intense heat and pressure that comes with the generation of electricity when you have a nuclear facility. And these are all advancements that are going to, I think, make it much more safe and much more efficient.
So we just need patience.
Yeah, and
we
just
need patience
being open-minded
and understand that
and learn and be willing to learn.
Be willing to learn. The science is going to bear out.
And talk to, I think the conversation, and like everything, don't stick your head in the sand and don't draw a line in the sand. And I think those two things will be helpful.
Stay out of the sandbox. Simon, thank you so much for visiting with us. Thanks for all the great work you do and for returning home to serve your community again.
Thank you.
It means a lot.
Thanks, sir.
All right, thanks. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed on the show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Action Colorado board members or staff. Action Colorado does not endorse candidates for office, but we do support our members. If you are a candidate running for office, or if you are a member of Action Colorado, you have an open invitation to come onto the show. If you have any questions or would like to discuss a topic on the show, or just for our information about joining Action Colorado, please email us at sarah@actioncolorado.org.